Hello all and welcome, and I am the Realist Philosopher. And in this video I would like to talk about a myth that has been held by the left for a very long time, and that is the idea of wealth inequality being something that's unfair. Oh, the 1%, the top 1% have 90% of the wealth. You know, you've heard this before, right? The top 1%. Yeah, from Bernie and all his supporters, that there's something wrong in the world, that there's something unfair with so few people having so much of the wealth, right? There's something wrong. There's something wrong with the system. The system itself is flawed, corrupt. It doesn't work correctly, because if it worked correctly, then wealth would be distributed more fairly, right? So what does this mean? Wealth inequality. This is the myth that they have believed for a long time. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that some people have more and some people have less, okay? Now, it's based on a long-held logical fallacy, which is this: the idea of the zero-sum game. So what zero-sum game means is that whatever situation you're talking about, there is a finite amount of something. In terms of the zero-sum game in regards to resources, there's a finite amount of them, right? So wealth is finite, things, which is what wealth is, wood, oil, gold, silver, food, coffee, things we make, things we build, nails, screws, computers, everything is wealth. These things that are created, these things that exist that have a purpose, that can be used to serve a purpose, things that there's a demand for, things that people want, things that people need. These things are limited, they're finite, right? So by this logic, if there are certain people who are accruing a lot of stuff, that means that there's less for others. So if, for example, one man has $5, it somehow costs another person money, right? There's no such thing as wealth creation. Wealth is only redistributed because resources are finite. They stay static, right? They never change, right? It doesn't matter how much you make of something. There's only going to be so many resources that are able to be drawn upon until you eventually reach a point where you can make no more of it. Does it make sense to you? So essentially what people mean when they say, oh, resources are finite, what they're really saying is that it's a static amount. It'll never change. And if this guy has $1 billion, then it's at the expense of everybody else. And the reason there's poor people is because he's taking too much. He's greedy. He's greedy. He's this grasping, greedy guy. And of course the implication is that he has somehow unfairly accrued this wealth. And even if he got it through hard work and such, he's too greedy. There's not enough for everybody else because he has accumulated so much just for himself, way more than he needs. So the implication is either he stole it, he got it unfairly, or even if he didn't, it's still unfair because nobody should be able to accrue that many resources, that much wealth, because that means there's less to go around, right? Wrong! Wrong, wrong, wrong. It's absolutely false. It's 100% a faulty bit of logic. It's total nonsense. There's no such thing as a zero-sum game, okay? So, if the idea of a zero-sum game is nonsense, then what is wealth? Is it limited? No. Wealth is limitless. It is unlimited because true wealth, the majority of it, is not based upon anything material. Okay? The majority of wealth comes from here, the human mind, human innovation, human creativity, human ingenuity. That is the basis of wealth. 90% of wealth is in the mind. The ideas that people come up with to advance civilization. We are continually advancing and finding new ways to do the same things. For example, you go back 150 years. Oil was just some useless goop, right? People saw it as nothing more than a nuisance. Sometimes it would come out of the ground. It was ugly to look at. It served no real purpose in their minds. But whale oil, oh, whale oil is great, right? Yeah, it lights our house, except that whale oil was running out. Because for a very long time, producing light from whale oil had been the norm. So in that regard, creating light, things had remained static for too freaking long. So whale oil was running out. It was becoming very expensive. So what happened? People innovated. They found new ways to light their homes, and bingo, oil. Now, what have we been using to light our homes and power our world for the past 100+ years? Oil, something that had been seen as completely useless not that long ago. Water, use it to bathe, right? Use it to take a bath. Oh, well, we've got some mills that are powered with a water wheel, right? But other than that, you fish in it, you wash with it, you drink it. Yeah, sure, it serves a purpose in that regard, but producing energy? Nah, no way. Now what do you got? Hydroelectric dams. The possibility in the future, the very near future, of widespread, cheap hydrogen fuel withdrawn from water. Now, right now, it's still in its infancy, okay? Mainly because we don't need it. We already have plenty of oil, right? 40 years ago, when I was a kid, I remember teachers in my school saying, oil's going to run out in 20 years, and when it does, there's going to be bedlam, and the world's going to crash and burn, right? We already had wacky leftists. We had wacky leftist ex-hippies even back then. It seemed like they wanted the world to crash and burn, right? And I was hearing all this about how oil's going to disappear. 40 years later, there's more oil than ever, right? Why? Because human beings, when faced with adversity, when faced with the necessity to innovate, they do. They do, and we found new, more efficient, cheaper, better ways to extract fuel. We've gotten better at getting it out of the ground. We've gotten better at accessing that oil, which prior, we didn't have the technology or the knowledge to access. So, the truth of the matter is that necessity is the mother of invention. Human ingenuity, imagination, and the need for something drives us to find better ways to do a thing. Or how about farming? For a long, long time, getting enough food for human beings was a real problem. They would scratch at the land day in, day out, and barely produce enough food to survive. But over time, and the necessity of life, of hunger, drove human beings to innovate, to discover new and better ways to extract bounty from the land. And we went from having food shortages to now we have so much food, oftentimes it spoils on the shelf. And the sell-by date passes and it doesn't sell because we have so much. And food is so cheap. How did it happen? Because there was a need. Because there was a need, and human beings worked tirelessly until eventually we reached a point where we could splice into the genes of the seeds for that food and make them disease resistant, make them grow bigger, make them grow faster, right? Now, we have more food than we need. Back in the 70s, I remember some goofy couple, 60s or the 70s, writing a book about how the world was going to end in 20 years. It was going to be doomsday. Food was going to run out. Resources were going to become scarce. People took this book seriously. It sold like hotcakes, this book, and people were buying it left and right. It was like a bestseller, and people were quoting it all the time. What happened? Nothing. Oh, something happened, all right. They were proven wrong. They were proven entirely wrong. They predicted that resources would become more expensive, not less. Less would be made, not more, which of course would drive up price. And eventually they would become so scarce that it would be near impossible to get them. What happened? Food production has increased exponentially. The ability to access and produce raw materials has increased exponentially. So they were wrong. Or how about trees? You remember all the hippies talk about we're going to have deforestation. And trees are going to run out. They're going to run out. You know why that's going to happen? If that does happen, you know why? Because there'll be less demand for trees. You see, there's actually such a thing as tree farms, where people grow trees for various uses. Exotic woods, hardwoods, for furniture and such. And it's based on demand, right? And the truth of the matter is that we have more trees now than we did 50 years ago. Way more, because there's a need, right? There's a need for them. There's not as great a need since the advent of the computer, right? We're always innovating. Our needs and necessities are always growing. The world doesn't stay static. The things that we need in our daily lives change. Hence, the raw materials and resources to produce those things change. So if we remain static, like with the whale oil, if we were still using whale oil, there would be no whales left and we would have no ability to light our homes. But that's not how reality works. The world is not a static place that becomes stagnant, at least not the Western world. Okay? So computers, 25 years ago. We didn't have computers when I was a kid. I mean, when I was in we did, yeah, okay. But my brother had a computer. He got one of the very first computers. Very expensive device. And then when he got tired of it and then he got a better computer, I got it. I got the hand-me-downs. There were no computers. Hence, there was no need for the materials within that computer. And suddenly the computer's created and suddenly there is a need for these resources and then they're getting made. And over time, people have gotten better, more efficient at making computers. They've gotten ever smaller. Hence, the resources required have become less. And of course, since computers have changed so much, the raw materials needed have changed. So humans are constantly innovating and evolving and changing both in the wealth that they produce, because wealth is just the things we use every day in our daily lives that there's a need for, there's a market for, there's a want for. Those things are constantly changing. So the resources we will need are constantly changing. Tomorrow, something new will come out. Something that was never seen, never used before, but suddenly people will want it. They'll need it. Like cell phones. When I was a kid, there were no cell phones. I remember the first cell phone was like a brick. It was so huge, I think it weighed 8 pounds or something, 8 or 9 or 10 pounds. It was gigantic. And you needed its own bag just to carry it around, and you could fit nothing else in the bag. And now look at them. They're tiny. They're wafer thin. The same product, but radically changed, and it uses far different materials than when it was created. Now, of course, if we were still making these gigantic brick cell phones, we would probably be at risk of running out of the very resources that went into that phone. Well, we humans are constantly changing and innovating, finding new ways to make a better mousetrap, because there's always competition. So we have to find better, more efficient, cheaper ways to do something. Less materials, cheaper materials, right? Innovation. Innovation. That's the real wealth, the human mind, the human intellect. And back to that tree farm. The next time some leftist comes up to you and says, oh, wealth is limited, resources are limited, and he's got a lot, I have less. Well, tell him that you have a tree farm. Or give them an example of a tree farm. That a man owns 1,000 acres. Well, let's say he owns 1,000 acres. That's not that much, actually. Okay, 10,000 acres. Let's tell him there's a man that owns a tree farm that has 10,000 acres of land, and he grows trees in a cyclical manner, so that he can farm them every year. So that eventually, when he gets back to the trees that he farmed 10 years ago, back to the area where those trees were planted, they're 10 years old. So he's constantly farming trees that have been growing for 10 years and using them specifically to make paper, because there is still a demand for paper. Not as great a demand, of course, since the computer, because, you can fit the entire Library of Congress on my hard drive that's maybe this big. So there's not as great a demand for paper, but there is still a need. So people do still have tree farms. And ask him, is that wealth? Are those trees wealth? And of course he has to reply yes, because they are. They're a natural resource, which by the way is being grown continually. So in essence, it is unlimited. They don't understand the logic behind that, though. That's infinite. So long as there's a need, that will be an infinite resource that is constantly created. And ask him, is the creation of those trees taking money out of your pocket? Is it shifting, redistributing resources from you to the owner of that farm? No. Well, then he's answered his own question and proven his own beliefs false. The belief that those on the left hold, that wealth and resources are limited, is what they use to justify redistribution of wealth. And it is a false premise. Resources are not limited. They are infinite, because they are based on the human mind, human ingenuity, human creativity, human imagination. And all one need do is look at the history of the world to see how we have constantly innovated and evolved in how we do the same things and created new, ever more technologically advanced advanced things that people prior hadn't thought they needed, but now they can't live their lives without. And one day, we'll reach to a point where we'll be traveling to other planets in our solar system, and eventually other planets, other stars outside of our solar system, to search for new sources of wealth, new resources that don't exist on our planet or are not plentiful enough anymore. Our need will drive us and force us to innovate, to be able to do these things. So wealth is not limited. It is unlimited. It is created. It's constantly being created and being added to constantly, both on the scale of a country and a global scale. And all you need to do is look at how wealthy the world is now and how wealthy it was even 100 years ago. So I hope that explains how the idea of a zero-sum game is a logical fallacy and a false premise that the left holds merely to rationalize their stealing from those who have more than they do. I am the Realist Philosopher, and I wish you a good day. Take care.